reports just into the Situation Room that Russia is accusing Ukraine of attacking one of President Vladimir Putin's residences overnight.
The story of the war in Ukraine is no longer written solely in broad strategic arrows on a map or the seizure of grand, symbolic cities. It is etched into the blackened earth of nameless fields, scored into the hulls of burned-out armor, and whispered in the static of encrypted drone feeds. It is a story told in moments, brief, violent, and decisive encounters that distill the essence of this conflict into raw, uncompromising lessons. This is an account of such moments, woven together from the fabric of frontline reporting, drone footage analysis, and the grim expertise of military observers. It is a narrative of how tactics are forged in fire, how technological terror is neutralized by ingenuity, and how the very soul of warfare is being rewritten in real time. The dawn was a cold, gray smear over the Donetsk Oblast. In a sector known only by military grid coordinates, the land lay quiet, a tableau of mud, shattered tree stumps, and the skeletal remains of farmhouses. The silence was an illusion, a fragile membrane stretched over profound tension. Along a sunken track, churned into a river of muck by countless treads, a column of Russian armor began to stir. The low, guttural rumble of diesel engines broke the stillness. This was a localized push, a battalion tactical group, or perhaps just a reinforced company tasked with probing the Ukrainian defensive line, testing for weakness, applying pressure. In the lead T-72B3, the Russian commander, let's call him Alexei, scanned the terrain through his panoramic sight. His breath fogged the slight chill inside the steel cocoon. His orders were clear, a relic of a simpler doctrine. Advance along axis red, establish fire dominance, and displace the enemy from their forward positions. The plan relied on mass and momentum, on the psychological weight of advancing steel. The column moved out, tanks followed by BMP infantry fighting vehicles, a slow, predatory worm emerging onto the open ground. What Alexei could not see, but what watched his every move, were the unblinking eyes in the sky. A Ukrainian times Lelico 100 times surveillance drone, its electric motor a faint hum at 1,500 feet, tracked the column's progress. The feed went to a tablet in a dugout 5 kilometers away, where a young intelligence sergeant marked waypoints. The information was fused with data from other sensors, the seismic tremor of treads picked up by ground sensors, radio intercepts, and painted a clear picture for the Ukrainian tank platoon commander, call sign Knight, waiting in a camouflaged hull-down position. Knight's force was smaller, 2 T-64 BV tanks and an M2 Bradley IFV, gifts from the battlefield and from allies, operated by a crew whose bond had been welded in the crucible of a year of continuous combat. They had spent the night preparing, carefully sighting their vehicles in defilade, using the natural slope of the land to show only their turrets and guns. Their camouflage nets were damp with dew, breaking up their thermal signature. They were not there to hold a static line. They were there to act as a dynamic kill team. As the Russian column cleared the tree line, committing to the open field, Knight gave a calm order over the net. Stand by, let the head pass. Engage the center. The Russian tactic was immediately apparent. A frontal, aggressive advance, trying to close the distance fast. It was a bet that Ukrainian resistance would be long-range and disorganized, that they could weather a few ATGM shots and overrun the position. The bet was wrong. The Ukrainian Bradley, positioned on a slight knoll to the flank, opened up first. Its 25mm Bushmaster chain gun barked, a sound like ripping canvas. Tracers streaked across the field, not aimed with pinpoint accuracy at the lead tank's heavy frontal glacis, but at the following BMPs, at vision blocks, and antennae. It was suppressive fire, designed to shock, to disorganize, to force the infantry to button up and break the combined arms cohesion of the assault. In the Russian column, confusion bloomed. Alexei, in the lead tank, swore, his vision blurred by dirt impacts near his sight. "Return fire! Identify target!" he yelled to his gunner. But the Bradley was a small, shifting target. As he searched, movement to his left caught his eye. Knight's tank had emerged from its hide, but it wasn't sitting still. The Ukrainian driver, responding to a terse command, threw the T-64 into reverse, using the terrain to maintain cover while the gunner laid the reticle on the side profile of the third vehicle in the column, a T-72 already distracted by the Bradley's fire. The Ukrainian gunner, Phantom, exhaled slowly, his finger resting on the trigger. The fire control computer had done its work, factoring in range, lead, can't. On target, he said, his voice flat. Fire. The tank kicked back, a brutal jolt. The muzzle flash was blinding for an instant. The sabot round, a depleted uranium dart traveling at over a mile per second, covered the distance in a blink. It struck the Russian tank just behind the turret ring, where the armor was thinner. There was a brilliant orange flash, a soundless bloom on the drone feed, followed a microsecond later by the thunderclap of impact. Then, the secondary explosion, the onboard ammunition cooking off. The turret of the Russian tank lifted clean off its race, spinning grotesquely in the air before crashing down into the mud. A pillar of flame and black smoke marked its grave. The battle's calculus shifted instantly. The Russian column's momentum, its aggressive intent, evaporated, replaced by a desperate struggle for survival. The destroyed tank blocked the path of those behind. The lead vehicle, Alexei's, was now isolated, its supporting infantry pinned by the Bradley's Fury. Knight's second tank now engaged, firing at a BMP trying to deploy its infantry. Another fireball. Alexei made the only decision left. Back up! Back up! Smoke! Canister launchers on his tank popped, ejecting a wall of white phosphorus smoke between him and the Ukrainians. The column, or what was left of it, lurched into a chaotic retreat, vehicles crashing into each other, abandoning the bold advance for the ignominy of a ragged withdrawal under fire. The engagement lasted less than 7 minutes. On the drone feed, it looked like a clinical execution. On the ground, it was a maelstrom of noise, fear, and adrenaline. The Ukrainians did not pursue. Knight ordered a displacement. Their vehicles reversed fully into cover, then moved along pre-scouted routes to alternate firing positions. They knew the Russian response would be artillery, and it was a barrage of 152mm shells cratering the ground they had just vacated, hitting nothing but dirt and the burning hulks of their own armor. Analysis, the duel's lesson. Military observers dissecting the footage highlighted several non-technological truths. First, situational awareness as a force multiplier. The Ukrainians fought with a near-perfect understanding of the battle space, fed by persistent drone surveillance. They saw the attack forming and chose the time and place of the engagement. The Russians moved blind into a prepared kill zone. Second, crew proficiency under pressure. The Ukrainian flanking maneuver was a high-risk, high-skill move. It required perfect coordination between commander, driver, and gunner under direct threat. The Russian crews, while brave, displayed tactical rigidity, sticking to a frontal approach that played to the defender's strength. Third, the primacy of the first shot. In modern tank combat, the side that fires accurately first usually wins. The Ukrainians achieved this through positioning and surprise. This brief clash proved that even in an age of drones and satellites, the human factors of training, initiative, and calm under extreme pressure remain the ultimate determinants in close combat. The failure of the armored probe was a tactical setback, but the Russian command in the sector was under pressure to show progress. Their response was to reach for the tool of shock and awe. The TOS-1A Solentsepia, Blazing Sun, heavy thermobaric rocket system. This weapon represents the apotheosis of brute force. Mounted on a T-72 chassis, it fires a barrage of 220mm rockets filled with thermobaric fuel-air explosive. Upon detonation, it does not just explode, it creates a devastating overpressure wave that pulverizes structures and collapses lungs, followed by a searing fireball that consumes oxygen. It is a weapon designed to erase grid squares and shatter morale. 2 nights later, under a moonless sky, a TOS-1, a battery moved into a forward-firing position. The crew, specialists in this fearsome weapon, worked with practiced efficiency. They knew the drill. Move in under darkness, fire a salvo, and leave immediately. The system's great weakness was its short range, often reported at just 6 to 10 kilometers for maximum effect. This meant operating dangerously close to the front, well within the kill chain of Ukrainian counter-battery systems. What the crew could not know was that their movement had been tracked from the moment they left their camouflage depot. A Ukrainian Mavic-class quadcopter, its rotors a faint whisper, had been loitering over likely approach routes for days, its operator working in shifts in a warm basement far behind the lines. The thermal signature of the tank-based launcher was unmistakable, a large, hot block moving slowly. The coordinates were sent to an artillery battalion equipped with NATO standard 155mm howitzers and, crucially, to a unit of drone operators specializing in first-person view, kamikaze drones. The TOS-1A reached its firing point. a small clearing near a ruined village. The launch array elevated with a hydraulic wind. The command was given. With a hellish roar, a full salvo of rockets leaped from the tubes, their tails painting fiery lines across the night sky. Seconds later, the horizon to the west erupted in a rolling series of colossal detonations. The sound was not a sharp crack, but a deep, resonant UMP that traveled through the ground, a visceral punch to the chest. On the drone feed, watching the impact zone, a wave of fire and superheated gas rolled across a suspected Ukrainian strongpoint, turning it into an inferno. In the Russian command post, there was grim satisfaction. The blazing sun had scorched the earth. The plan, codenamed Hammer Blow, now moved to its second phase, a ground assault by mechanized infantry to exploit the presumed devastation and chaos. Orders were radioed to the waiting assault groups, but on the Ukrainian side, the reality was different. The troops in that sector had long since adapted to the threat of thermobarics. Their defensive doctrine had evolved from deep, static trench lines, perfect targets for area weapons, into a dynamic, dispersed network. They lived by the mantra, dispersion is life. Strongpoints were manned by skeleton crews, with the majority of fighters spread out in individual fighting holes, spider holes, and hidden cellars, connected by a robust mesh network of Starlink terminals and encrypted radios. The warning had come hours before. Drone spotters had seen the TOS units mustering. The code word Pashik Bumblebee had flashed across company chats. When the rockets were in the air, the final warning came. Beacon, out. The Ukrainian soldiers didn't wait for the impact. They dropped into deep bunkers, scrambled into reinforced cellars, or simply moved laterally out of the predicted impact zone. The physical destruction of the position was, indeed, total. Trenches were flattened, bunkers collapsed, trees were vaporized. But the human toll was a fraction of what it would have been a year prior. As the last echoes of the thermobaric blast faded, a new sound filled the air, the aggressive, high-pitched whine of countless small drones. This was the Ukrainian counterpunch, and it was lightning fast. While the Russian assault groups were still forming up to move, Ukrainian FPV drone operators, their feeds showing the still smoldering launch point, went to work. The TOS-1A crew was in the most vulnerable phase of their mission, the post-salvo displacement. The launcher was wreathed in smoke and dust, its thermal signature a blazing beacon. The vehicle lurched as the driver threw it into reverse, desperate to get back to cover. They had perhaps 3 minutes to escape. They had 30 seconds. A Ukrainian FPV operator, call sign Wasp, watched from his screen. His drone, a modified racing quadcopter with an RPG-7 warhead strapped to its belly, streaked just meters above the ground at nearly 60 miles per hour. On his video goggles, the hot rectangle of the TOS-1A grew larger, centered in his crosshairs. He muttered a curse, made a final micro-adjustment, and pushed the throttle to maximum for the terminal dive. The video feed showed a chaotic rush of ground, then the looming rear of the vehicle, then static. The impact of the shaped charge warhead was catastrophic. It pierced the thinner rear armor and detonated amidst the remaining rockets and the massive fuel-air explosive canisters. The resulting explosion was apocalyptic. A fireball boiled into the sky, visible for miles. The TOS-1A was utterly obliterated, along with its crew and escort vehicle. A multi-million-dollar weapon system, a symbol of terrifying power, had been reduced to scattered, molten scrap by a drone built for a few $100s. The planned Russian ground assault, launched into the sector, now faced a nightmare. Instead of a shattered, leaderless enemy, they encountered a reactivating defense. Ukrainian artillery, having used the time between the TOS launch and the FPV strike to calculate firing solutions, now unleashed a precision barrage on the Russian assembly areas and approach routes. Excalibur and Krasnopol shells began landing with meter accuracy. The assault, designed to be a swift exploitation, bogged down into a bloody, close-quarters infantry fight among the very ruins the TOS-1A had created, ruins that now provided perfect cover for Ukrainian snipers and anti-tank teams. Analysis: the terror's trap. This sequence illustrates a fundamental reversal in the asymmetric warfare playbook. The transparency of the battlefield. The TOS-1A is a weapon from an era of opaque warfare. In Ukraine, where the sky is saturated with sensors, its movement signature is a liability. It cannot hide. The vulnerability of the shoot and scoot. The system's short range forces it into the enemy's deep reconnaissance and strike zone. The scoot phase is now the most dangerous, as drone hunters lie in wait. The adaptation of the defender. Ukrainian forces have systematically invalidated the weapon's purpose by abandoning the concentrated targets it was designed to destroy. Dispersion, early warning, and rapid movement negate its area effect. The psychological flip. The TOS-1A has morphed from a weapon of terror for defenders into a high-value, high-priority target for attackers, a trophy kill that delivers both material and morale victories. Its deployment now signals not an impending breakthrough, but a risky gamble that often fails. The war ground on, a relentless metronome of violence. In another sector, a week later, Russian logistics and rotation patterns had been meticulously studied by Ukrainian military intelligence. They identified a vulnerable point, a paved road that served as a crucial supply artery, running for several kilometers perilously close to the contact line before ducking into a forest. Aerial surveillance over days showed a patterned convoys moving at dawn and dusk, often in tight, hurried formations. A Ukrainian combined arms team was tasked with designing an ambush. It was a complex operation involving drone spotters, a tank platoon, anti-tank guided missile, ATGM teams, and mortar crews. The plan was not to harass, but to annihilate. Dawn again. A Russian column appeared on the road, a mix of T-80BV tanks, MTLB armored carriers, and a few fuel trucks, a classic resupply and rotation group. They moved with intense urgency, commanders' heads out of hatches for better visibility, but the formation was tight, bunched up on the constricting road. They were likely counting on speed and the early morning gloom for protection. They were wrong. A Ukrainian Bayraktar TB2, operating far behind Russian lines, but with its powerful camera trained on the road, provided the overarching picture. As the convoy entered the pre-designated kill zone, a long, straight stretch flanked on one side by a low, wooded rise and on the other by a waterlogged field, the trap was sprung. The first strike was not from tanks, but from artillery. A carefully timed barrage of cluster munitions or conventional high explosive slammed down behind the lead vehicles and in front of the tail vehicle. The effect was to bracket the convoy, cutting off escape routes and creating instant chaos. Drivers slammed on brakes, vehicles swerved, the neat column compressing into a chaotic cluster. Then, the main event. From hidden positions in the tree line on the rise, 2 Ukrainian tanks, a modernized T-64 and a captured T-80 opened fire at near point-blank range, less than 800 meters. They had been waiting for this moment for 36 hours. The first Sabot round struck the lead tank in the side, turning it into an instant pyre. The second shot targeted a fuel truck near the center of the column. It erupted in a colossal fireball, showering burning diesel over nearby vehicles and turning the road into a river of flame. Panic became epidemic. Russian vehicles, trapped between cratered road and impassable bog, tried desperately to deploy. A MTLB swung off the asphalt only to sink hub-deep in the mud, becoming a stationary target. Ukrainian ATGM teams positioned on the flanks now joined the fray. American-supplied javelins and Swedish AT-4S streaked from the woods. The distinctive whoosh crump of the launches was followed by the devastating top-attack blast as javelin missiles arced down onto tank turrets. The drone footage from the Bayraktar was clinical, horrifying. It showed the systematic destruction of a military unit. One by one, vehicles were struck. Secondary explosions rippled down the line as ammunition cooked off. Thick, black smoke stained the morning sky. The few surviving Russian soldiers abandoned their vehicles and fled on foot across the open field, only to be cut down by pre-sighted Ukrainian mortar fire and machine gun positions. The entire engagement was over in less than 15 minutes. What remained was a kilometer-long funeral pyre of twisted metal, a corridor of death that would serve as a grim warning to subsequent Russian columns. The Ukrainian forces, following a strict timeline, ceased fire and began to withdraw before Russian reaction artillery or close air support could arrive. They left behind a scene of utter devastation. Analysis, the Killing Fields message. This ambush was a masterclass in modern tactical execution. Intelligence prepared battlefield. The attack was not opportunistic. It was the result of days of pattern analysis, making the enemy's routine their vulnerability. Synergy of combined arms. The Ukrainians seamlessly integrated long-range surveillance, Bayraktar, area denial, artillery to fix the target, direct fire tanks for shock and killing power, and precision strike ATGMs and mortars for mop-up. Each system played a specific role in a synchronized sequence, the total cost of a mistake. The Russian error was procedural, using a predictable route in a predictable formation at a predictable time. In the transparent battlefield, Such rigidity is fatal. The convoy's movement, intended for efficiency, became its death sentence. This incident underscored that in Ukraine, tactical patience and information superiority are more valuable than raw numbers. The thunder of dueling tanks, the earth-shattering roar of thermobaric weapons, the methodical destruction of a convoy, these are the symphonies of the Ukrainian front. But the melody has changed. The war has evolved from its initial, chaotic phase into a grueling, technologically saturated contest of adaptation. The lessons are written in steel and blood. The democratization of lethality. A $500 drone can kill a $5 million tank. A well-trained crew in an older tank can defeat a technologically superior one through better tactics. The correlation between cost, size, and effectiveness has been shattered. The primacy of the unblinking eye. The side that owns the surveillance picture owns the battlefield. Drone footage is no longer just for after-action reports. It is the central nervous system of the fight, directing every move and enabling every kill. Dispersion over concentration. The age of mass formations is over, at least on this battlefield. Survival depends on being small, mobile, and networked. Static defenses are tombs waiting to be filled. The human factor endures. Amidst the silicon and steel, the final determinants remain human. The creativity of a commander designing an ambush, the nerve of a tank crew executing a flank under fire, the patience of a drone operator waiting for the perfect shot, and the resilience of infantry who learn to scatter before the storm and reform after it passes. For Ukraine, these brutal vignettes are not just tales of local victories. They are the proof of concept for a strategic doctrine built on agility, intelligence, and the decentralized initiative of its fighting units. They are defending by being unpredictable, by turning the enemy's strength into a vulnerability, by mastering the new calculus of combat where the fastest mind and the most adaptable system wins. For Russia, they represent the immense challenge of retooling a military built for a different kind of war. A war of massed artillery and sweeping armored advances against an enemy that refuses to fight that war. It is a grinding attrition, but the attrition is not symmetrical. It favors the defender who learns faster. The smoke over the fields of Donetsk and Zaporizhia continues to rise. The thundering sound of steel still echoes, but it is now punctuated by the ubiquitous whine of the drone, the true herald of this new age of conflict. In the silence that follows each explosion, the front line whispers its unforgiving equation, a lesson paid for in lives and metal: adapt or be annihilated.